Hello and welcome to episode 1 in the Zbrush training series brought to you by 3dbuzz.com. I'm Buzz.
And I'm Zach.
And Zach will be our host on this amazing journey as he teaches us Pixologic's Zbrush.
Zbrush 2.
Ooh, Zbrush 2. Yeah, well, the first thing I see when it launches is a scary-looking application that looks nothing like your standard Windows user interface.
It doesn't really look like it comes from Windows at all.
Second thing that comes to mind is it doesn't look like any kind of 3D program I've ever seen.
Well, it's not like any kind of 3D program you've ever seen.
It's not.
And it's not like any 2D program you've ever seen. It actually has elements of both.
Okay.
But we're going to get into that here in just a minute. So this video is going to get you up and running in ZBrush 2.0.
All right.
Kind of scratch the surface, allow you to show you a few tools that you play around, see how things work.
So by the time we get to the very end of this video, I should be able to jump in here with this foreign-looking UI and use the application to have a little bit of fun.
Create some artwork.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's what we're talking about. So, what is ZBrush? ZBrush is a 2.5D tool-based application.
Okay.
And that sounds really, really complex.
Well, you said 2.5D. I'm used to 2D applications like Microsoft Paint, GIMP, Photoshop, etc.
Sure.
And I know 3D applications like 3ds Max, Maya, etc. 2.5D? What you mean?
I mean that it's got a little bit of both.
Okay.
We have 2D in that we have an X and a Y axis
Gotcha.
in our document. We also have a Z axis, which if I was to paint a little bit, you'll notice that my paint stroke seems to have a little bit of depth.
Yes,
it does. It looks like a 3D object in and of itself.
Okay.
But I can only view it kind of from this angle, like this bird's eye view of it.
Meaning what you just created does not exist in a 3D environment. Instead, it exists on a canvas.
That's right.
So it's kind of like we've just piled up a bunch of oil paint or something.
And we have like a locked camera that we can't move around to manipulate through a 3D scene.
Forget that. We don't even have a locked camera. It's just, this is like our piece of paper we're painting on.
Exactly. And that's where you get the 2.5D.
Where if we were working in a 3D environment with something like 3ds Max, we're in a digital environment where we can rotate our cameras around and walk through this environment and look at our objects from different perspectives, et cetera, et cetera.
Precisely.
Gotcha. We can't do that here.
That's right. Now, the reason that this is possible, the reason we can have this depth-looking effect is because we are not working with pixels as you know them from Photoshop or MS Paint.
Talking about the little dot that lights up on our monitor. And
a little dot that stores 3 values for red, green, and blue.
Gotcha.
We are using pixels, spelled like Pixologic.
Ah, I gotcha. So
that's right.
P-I-X-O?
O-L. Now, the reason that these are so special is because a pixel can store depth information. So these pixels are aware of their current depth. As I paint with them and they appear to be getting higher and higher toward the camera, they are aware of that depth. And as I start to erase, I can push them back down.
Creepy.
Now, currently, I'm just painting a single color with one material. So, if this was a regular paint application, I wouldn't be getting any change right now.
Gotcha.
I wouldn't be able to see this really cool alteration in depth, but that's the heart of the pixel.
So each pixel, each little dot is containing an R, a G, a B, and a depth.
And a Z.
Gotcha.
You'll notice if we look up here at the top, we have Rgb Intensity and Z Intensity, but I'll talk a little bit more about that a bit later.
Awesome. Okay.
Now, something else I said about ZBrush is that it is a tool-based application.
Okay.
It's not scene-based. It's not object-based. It's tool-based. Now,
Gotcha.
what do I mean when I say that? Well, ZBrush is basically a very well-rounded painting application. The purpose of ZBrush in and of itself is to make pretty images.
Okay.
You are not here to make a three-dimensional scene or three-dimensional objects, though you can make 3D objects. That's where things get a little bit confusing. But the 3D objects that you create are there for the sole purpose of allowing you to create beautiful imagery.
Okay.
For example, I could go under my tools palette, and we could pull out, what's this? We have the Spiral 3D, and I could drag this out. Now, it looks very three-dimensional.
Yes, it does.
In fact, if I hit the T key to go into edit mode, which is something I'll talk a bit about later, I can rotate around it.
All right.
You'll notice it has faces, like many polygon objects you may have seen in a 3D package. It can be seen from any different angle, and I am rotating about it very much like you would in a 3D package. But it is considered to be a tool and not a 3D object.
Okay.
Because as soon as I get out of edit mode, it has been stamped onto the canvas.
Gotcha.
And now it is just a series of pixels.
So the object, a second ago, we kind of can look at it like this. It's a tool. So we're holding this object above the canvas, if we were to visualize this in the real world. So it's a tool. We're using it, we're looking at it, and then when we're done with that, it's splat.
Pretty much.
And it looks just like the last position we had it in, but now painted into our canvas.
That's right. In fact, if I go back to my paintbrush that I had a second ago and I start painting again, you'll notice that I'm painting right over this, and the depth just kind of builds off that object now.
Yeah, I see that.
So that we're just kind of stacking more pixels on top of what we just created.
Very cool.
So every 3D object that you see in ZBrush, and you'll probably work with a few throughout your career, again, is considered a tool because you're using it, as far as ZBrush is concerned, to create a beautiful image.
Gotcha.
Now, that said, here's where things get a little bit fun and a little bit confusing, is that you can take a 3D object. Let's grab a different one this time. And here it is, and you'll notice it's sticking kind of through the canvas because of its orientation, but that's okay. We'll go back into edit mode and we'll rotate around it so you can see it kind of poking through all the different depth parts of our canvas, so very fancy there. But we can go under Tool, under our tool palette, which I'll talk a little bit about later, and we have the ability to export this object out as an OBJ file. And an OBJ file could be opened up inside of Maya.
Okay.
So we have access to the polygons if we wanted to take this over into Maya and continue to model on it further or use it in a 3D scene.
Very nice.
But inside of ZBrush, again, it's just a tool.
So now that we've seen what ZBrush is, it's an application that allows us to basically create artwork that has depth, but it's on a canvas. What is ZBrush not?
It's not an animation application.
Gotcha. So there's no bouncing balls.
No
walk cycles.
No animation curves whatsoever.
Excited characters.
That's right. Now, the objects that you create and export out of ZBrush are certainly animatable. You could take this ninja star-looking thing over into Maya. You could move it around or,
inside of Maya.
Inside of Maya, but you can't do anything with it here as far as animation is concerned. Again, ZBrush is all about making beautiful images.
Okay, very cool. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that well. Now, next thing. When a beginner first installs this application and has this, very unique-looking user interface, talk for just a second about the help.
Yeah, see, here's the thing. I was a little bit leery about bringing this up because it's kind of like job security loss immediately. I was hoping to show you guys a few things about the user interface, but the funny thing is you don't really need me, and I acknowledge that.
Oh, but it's so fun to listen to you talk.
That's what I used to think.
And me make fun of your incredible artwork that we're now looking at on the screen.
Okay, let's just move on.
Moving on.
Okay, so ZBrush will teach its user interface to you.
Nice. Very,
very quickly. Now, hang on just a second. Let me go ahead and clear off my document because that's distracting even me. I'm going to go under my document palette.
Okay.
Notice I didn't say menu.
Right.
And we'll click on New Document. And this is very Windows-like.
Yes,
that
it
looks
is.
familiar.
Yes, it does.
Would you like to save changes? No. So, boom, there we go.
Okay.
Now, if this is what you see when you first load ZBrush, pretty much. And you can go over to Help. And you get a nice little window that pops up with some help topics. Now, what you are looking at, you'll notice there's a little blinking red dot in the corner. Whenever you see this, you're looking at what is called a Z script.
Interesting.
Now, Z scripts are many, and they have a lot of variety.
Okay.
A Z script can do anything from showing you the exact steps that an artist took to create something.
Meaning that while doing a masterpiece, I could have Z script record it. In such a way that every single step I have performed to get that masterpiece is then in a script that can be played back and someone can watch every single step I took.
Well, I'll go you one better. Whenever you're using ZBrush, by default, it is recording.
Oh, very interesting.
So everything that you do can be played back later for someone else to follow along with what you did.
Gotcha.
But they do other things, too. Like in this case, it's creating this window where we can click and see various help things. There are some Z scripts that work as plugins and perform various functions.
Wow.
The list goes on, and you can download a lot of these from Pixologic's website and over at Zbrush Central.
So, very powerful.
Very, very, very powerful. Now, let's take a look at one of these real quick. If we pop over to Zbrush Essentials, one of the entries we see is Zbrush Interface. And if we click on this, we get a little readout that talks a bit about palettes and, basic mode and expert mode. But who ever reads this kind of thing?
Right.
I can't. I see too much text, my eyes blur, and I can't pay attention.
We just want to click and play.
But we have the Zbrush Interface Z-Script tutorial. And if we click on this, do you see what my mouse just did?
Wow, it just took over and stuff's popping up and doing things.
That's right. My mouse automatically moved up to the corner and opened up this particular Z-script. I didn't do anything. It was like a ghost took over the machine.
Scary. And I also noticed that there's 2 red buttons that now exist at the bottom.
That's right. We have, if we mouse over this, we get a little tooltip that says press to play the Z-script, can be aborted anytime pressing escape. Let's go ahead and click on it. And now ZBrush is going to tell you all about its own user interface with visual reference.
Awesome.
In fact, it's actually going to perform various tasks just to show you how they work. It talks about the menu bar and the title bar. It'll show you the different palettes. And just watch this real quick. After it's done, like it'll actually open things up. See, it takes over the mouse,
wow,
points things out to you, and all you have to do is click and read. It's very, very user-friendly. Now, instead of sitting here and showing, here, it's going to open some stuff up for us.
How kind of it.
Let's go ahead and hit escape, and then I'll close these two palettes off.
Because it was actually truly changing our user interface.
Yes, it was. It was actually moving things around. Now, when you're done, once you've watched all of this and you decide you don't need it anymore, you can just click Default Z-Script, and that'll take you right back to your default setup.
Okay.
Okay, now with that said, feel free to take a look at that Z-Script. It will walk you around the user interface and pretty much show you everything that I'm going to be showing you as far as the UI is concerned.
Okay, excellent. So, speaking of UI, let's now go ahead and just do a real quick trip around the user interface.
Real quick, we have our own title bar. This has got a few things in it where if we have created a custom UI, if we can load it up here. We have access to the standard UI. If you move something, break something, and you need to get back to the way things have always been when you load up ZBrush.
Oh, thank heavens.
There you go. Because like you can, without thinking about it, start breaking things.
Oh, whoa.
And you got to kind of watch out. And all I'm doing I'm holding down Control and I'm dragging elements off the UI.
Okay, that's awesome. But
and I can. It's very cool. I mean, it's a very nice,
so
user friendly.
Can you dock those? And
I can dock them. I can snap them to one another. Just hold down Control and drag on them again.
Wow.
And, you
Ooh,
can
look at that.
You can kind of make your own alignment of these guys.
That's kind of freaky.
And when you're done, if you want everything to go back the way it was, just click Standard, and it'll put everything back.
Oh, very
So
cool.
if you break the UI and you start to get frustrated, just know about this button so that you can set everything back. If you're working on the document and you don't want anything else in your way, you can click the little D here, and it just brings in the document, which is very handy, of course. So let's go ahead and go back to Standard. If you're confused about something, there's a little Help button. You can click on that and then interface over any object. But a shortcut, if you need to know what anything does in ZBrush, you can just mouse over it, like Z Intensity. We don't know what that does right now, so put your mouse on it, hold down the Control key.
Wow, how about that?
ZBrush will tell you all about it. So like there's the zoom button, and it tells you all about that. Every single button.
Notice it's also
ZBrush.
spitting out hotkeys for you as well.
I mean, it's going to teach itself to you. So really, I don't have much job security as far as ZBrush is concerned for teaching you the UI. But that's cool. I dig that.
Yeah, it's very cool.
Okay, so next underneath the title bar, we have the menu bar, which gives us access to all of the palettes in ZBrush. Every single button, knob, switch, and dial in ZBrush, even the stuff you see all around the user interface, is available from these palettes.
Okay.
Now, some of these you'll be using, some of these palettes, some of the objects within the palettes you'll be using very frequently, and so they've been put on the user interface for you, such as tools. You don't necessarily want to dig up to a menu just to change what kind of a brush you're using.
Sure.
So you've got access to your tools right here, and so on for everything else. You have alphas, you have strokes, which I'll talk about a little bit later.
Okay.
So some of the palettes that you will be needing, though, you have document.
Yeah, well, obviously we need to open and save and things like that.
Right, this is kind of like your file menu from a typical Windows application.
Okay.
We have, of course, open, save, save as. We can import and export. We can click on new document. We can double or half the size of the document or
set
put
resolution.
custom sizes.
Okay.
Yeah, all sorts of cool stuff we can do in here. Now, digging down to maybe the next important one, we have edit. This is where you're going to find your undos and redos. If you have experience with Photoshop, you know the importance of layers, and ZBrush does have layers. You can take paint strokes and put them into separate layers and hide those layers and fill them and so on and so forth. We have a lighting setup. Something that does kind of make this whole thing stand out from Photoshop is that as we paint, you'll notice that some, my strokes have lighter areas and darker areas.
Obviously, that's going to be real important. If we're going to simulate depth, we need to be able to, shade our strokes.
Right.
And in shading, you've got to have some sort of light in the scene.
That's right. You got to have some sort of lighting, and you can change your entire lighting setup here. You can bring in more lights. You can reposition your lights, and so on
Excellent.
and so forth. We have access to our materials, which you'll also see down here. I'll talk more about those a little bit later. Some of the other really big ones that you're going to need. Preferences. This is a really nice one. This is where you can change just about everything about ZBrush to suit your needs. For example, like I'm using a Wacom tablet for this, and if you want, you can change what your tablet will do. First off, do you want to use it? This is on by default, by the way. So if you have a tablet, you're good to go. But you can change how much the size of the tablet's going to be controlled. You can change the tablet's intensity. You can change how its color is affected. This is all like the pressure sensitivities.
Right.
So you can tweak all those around. Another really important one is the interface area, and this is where you can change all of your user interface. You can't hear me click the mouse usually.
Right.
But right now, just take my word for it, my hand is completely away from my mouse button. And as I mouse over these menus, you'll notice they all pop open automatically.
And that can become a bit annoying for some people.
If you're brand new to ZBrush and you're not used to that type of behavior, it can become downright frustrating because you come up here and you'll click on one, and when you click on it, you make it disappear.
Right.
So if that drives you up the wall, you can come in here and switch off auto pull down, and now when you mouse over it, you've got to click to bring up the menu.
Like a normal Windows application.
Exactly. So, do what makes you feel comfy. You can also come down and change basically every single thing about your user interface. You can change your icon colors. Basically, here's the colors for everything in ZBrush. So make yourself at home.
Scanning through that, it looks like you can change everything you can think of.
You can, absolutely. Make yourself at home. If you like what you see, you can save it out to your own layout, which will load up when you load ZBrush. Or, of course, if you break something, just go ahead and click on Standard again and bring it all back to the way it was. In fact, now that I've clicked Standard, you'll notice that I'm back to auto pull down.
Right. Okay.
Okay, moving on from here, we have textures. Tools is a big area that I like to dig into a lot, and we'll use this as an example to talk a bit about how these palettes work and some of the things you can do with them. Right now, my interface is broken up into my title bar, which you've seen, my menu bar. We have the left margin area, the right margin area. We have kind of a toolbar up here across the top. We have our tutorial bar down here on the bottom. Really, the big reason this guy exists is for any ZScript tutorials like what I had earlier.
Okay.
You can store the buttons down here. If you're not going to be using tutorials, go ahead and hide this. You can just click on the little bar right there. Boom, it disappears. That gives you a little more screen space.
Sure.
Now, if you're not a big fan of having to dig into your menu bar to get to various things, like let's say, for example, I know I'm going to be digging into my tools a lot, but I don't want to have to move my mouse all the way up here. I want to be able to see my options at all times. Hiding back behind our two margin areas, we have these two little bars which we can click, and that will expand the left and right palette area.
Okay.
Now, the cool thing is you'll notice I'm losing screen space left and right here.
Yeah, of course, people need to understand we're running at 10 by 7, so if this was, at a much higher resolution, you'd still be okay.
I recommend you run ZBrush at 1280.
Minimum.
Minimum. As big as you can get away with would be better. But I can take my tool palette, and you'll just have this little tiny orange icon here. If I click on this guy, I've just sent this palette over to my palette area, so now it's going to be visible at all times.
Very cool.
Now, I'm just going to show one of these for the time being because I'm eating up way too much screen space. Now, this is exactly what you see over here. I have two view modes for it. I have basic mode and I have expert mode.
Okay.
Basic mode shows you only what you really need to see, the things you're going to be working with the most. You can toggle between basic and expert with this little tiny orange arrow. So if I click this, I'm going to see a few more operations. Now, I don't have any tools available that will show me a whole lot at the moment.
Right.
But if I was to bring in, say, a 3D object and maybe go into edit mode, and now notice I switch over here into expert mode, I get a long list of things.
Whoa.
And each of these can be expanded. Like if I go to deformation, this gets huge. And now I can scroll up and down by clicking here in this blank area. And then I could open up masking, and I could open up polygroups. And you'll notice this just gets massive. So I like using this because digging this all out of this palette area becomes very, I'd say counterintuitive. I like having it over here.
Sure, it makes sense.
Now, if you maybe you're a Maya user and you like the channel box, and that would mean you kind of like having all of your palettes and things kind of on the right-hand side of your screen.
Yeah, all
as
of your
opposed to the left.
parameters. Yeah.
You could grab this little orange icon again and just drag over here, bink, and now just close it on this side. So
Nice.
whichever side you like to work on, it's very, very user-friendly. So for now, I really don't want to get into all of these various
Yeah, that's
operations.
good enough.
I know. I just wanted to show you that it could get scary.
Yeah,
that was
very
my
nice.
only point. I think I was able to demonstrate that pretty well. So that's a quick look at some of the things you can do from the palette area. Of course, I didn't go over each and every single one of the palettes, but you don't need to know every single one of them to have a lot of fun in here.
Okay.
Let's go back to Document. Let's go ahead and click on New Document just to clear everything out. Okay, underneath our main menu bar, we have some commonly used functions that we're going to be using a lot. Things like our draw size. Now, what is draw size? Let me go ahead and grab my simple brush. My draw size is going to be my paintbrush size.
Okay.
As I click and drag this, you'll notice that my brush gets bigger for a nice big fat stroke, or smaller for a little tiny stroke.
Hold your mouse over that and hit Control. Over draw size.
Oh, bink.
So, looking over this, does it have a hotkey we can use?
It does, but it's not going to readily...
this one
just
there.
mouse over it. And there you go.
Ah, okay.
Then it tells you the hotkey. So
Excellent.
it kind of goes back and forth. Usually you can just mouse over and it'll tell you the hotkey if there is one.
Okay, cool.
Now, yeah, draw size I use more often just by hitting S. and then you get a little slider wherever your mouse is.
Okay.
So if my mouse is over here in the corner, click S and it's over here. This does get a little bit confusing. You have to be ready for it. Because if you hit S and then move your mouse, it disappears.
I gotcha.
So just get used to practicing that. We can make our mouse nice and big.
So you can't hold S down and just drag left to right?
No.
Okay.
Because as I'm dragging, I am reinitiating that window, and it starts to confuse things.
Yep,
so
I'm with you.
Just tap once, drag out a new size, and then move away, and it disappears.
Okay, cool.
Now, up above this, we have focal shift. This is a very fancy way to control how soft your brush is. The smaller the little tiny circle, the more softening your brush has.
Gotcha.
So the tighter your brush is going to be until it
Whoa,
gets...
it's like a slinky.
Yeah, I was say it looks just like a slinky. So that's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and undo. Now, here's probably the most important function in any artistic application is undo. It's Control-Z, and we just undo all the way back down.
Very nice.
If you need to redo, you can hit Control-Shift-Z, and there you go.
Excellent. Okay.
So keep those in mind at all times. All right, now something about the way ZBrush works. We talked about it having depth. Mm-hmm. Because it has depth, you can add depth and you can remove depth at any given point. Now let me go ahead and maybe adjust my focal shift a little bit so I have a prettier brush again.
Actually, you know what? If you don't mind, I'm going to change your direction just a little bit.
Change me. What you got?
When you go to paint,
yep.
What are all of the elements you need to be aware of when you go to paint? In other words, you got a brush.
Okay.
It's got thickness to it.
Yeah.
It's being added or subtracted.
I'm with you.
There's an alpha with it.
There is.
There's a material with it.
There is.
There's a texture with it.
All these things, and you're scaring them away. I mean, they're turning off the video one by one. I can hear them.
But all of these things are involved with a simple stroke.
Yep, and they're very, very important. Let me go ahead and bring that up. Okay. First off, you've seen me make a couple of brush strokes. Mm-hmm. And currently I am adding Z depth. That's why we're going higher instead of lower.
Gotcha.
Now, that's one element of a brush stroke. Whether you are adding Z depth, whether you are removing Z depth, or maybe you're not touching Z depth at all.
And you can see that from right
the
here.
The Z intensity. You can be set to
add or subtract.
Subtract. Notice if I subtract, I'm now cutting holes in what I had before. And we have a Z intensity, which controls how far we want to either push or pull. And I like to think of it as pushing and pulling.
Sure.
It just makes it a little easier in my head. So that's one thing you're going to be thinking about when you're creating a brush stroke. Another one is your RGB intensity, but that doesn't mean anything unless you actually have a color.
Okay.
So let me skip that for now. I'll come back to RGB intensity.
Okay, so we know we're adding and subtracting.
Yep, that's just our Z depth.
Okay, so we're using our brush.
And what type of brush do we want to use? Let's kind of talk about this area over here on the left-hand side, because this is where everything you do in a stroke is going to be controlled.
Exactly.
So we have what type of tool do we want to use? We have our simple brush. We have a big, long, wide variety of brushes. We have the single layer brush, which if you take a look at it, let me bring up a little bit of Z intensity. It gives you sort of flattened
This is
effect.
really interesting. The reason Zach's painting over that and it's taken a while to bring it back up is because a second ago he had subtract on.
Yep.
And he pushed the paint, if you will, past the canvas that we see.
Right.
Though we can't see how far he pushed it because we can only see to the canvas.
Right.
So now when he starts to add back to that, it's being added back to where it's pushed through the canvas and has to slowly build back.
That's right. And that gray wall back there is called the clipping plane.
Yeah.
And you may have actually heard that if you've come from a 3D application. We've more or less pushed our pixels back behind the clipping plane, and now we'd have to slowly bring them all up unless we either created a new document, but since I've already shown you that, we can go under Layer, and since we only have one layer, we can just click Clear, and that wipes the whole thing out.
Excellent.
So, here's another tool, and this is the single layer brush. You'll notice it gives you kind of a flattened look.
Okay.
Instead of having a whole lot of depth. And you can build another stroke up on top of it, but it still has that flat look. We have, I'm not going to show you all of them.
Actually, do this. Okay, that's good. Now, undo a couple times.
Boom, boom.
All the way back to it's empty. Now, change your intensity from 100 way down and paint again using that same tool.
Well, let me get my flat brush back out.
Okay.
So there it is. Single layer brush. And
all right, now that's good. Now, again.
Make a lower one.
Yeah. There you guys can start to see how the intensity
and then here's one that'll kind of layer on top.
Nice.
Yeah, and you can crank that up, too, and you get this really big, thick stroke. It's kind of like controlling, like a bevel depth almost.
Yeah, it is. Okay, cool.
So there's a quick look at some of the different tools. Now, you basically have three types of tools in here. You have like your brush type tools. You have editing type tools where you can use these to change intensity. You can colorize objects. You can change saturation. These are kind of like different blend modes on brushes in Photoshop, if you will.
Okay.
We have editing brushes, like we have the smudge brush. and this will just kind of smear strokes around.
Sweet.
So you can get some really cool effects like that. And then we have tools that allow us to create 3D objects.
Well, do the funky hair one.
Oh, the funky hair one. Gotcha. The snake hook brush?
Yeah, that one's...
This one's... I still haven't come up with a completely practical
maybe
use for this.
Smaller... Oh, actually, that'll work.
But it is fun to play with.
That's awesome.
And then you maybe pull one out over here and then snake it back through itself. And it actually went back under itself.
Very
because
cool.
that depth is being recorded. So that's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to set your tool.
Okay.
Now, the next thing, let me go ahead and set this over to the simple brush for our purposes.
Sure.
Now, under this, you have alpha. Now, if you come to ZBrush from maybe a gaming background, like game design, you might be familiar with alpha as sort of an area of transparency.
Okay.
If you come from hardcore Photoshop, like recent Photoshop, you'll think of it as a way to store a selection.
Okay.
Inside of ZBrush, it has a whole new definition.
Okay.
It's more or less the shape of your brush stroke.
Okay.
That's a really good way to think about it. Like here we have this alpha that is white at the center and softens out as it gets out to the edge. And so we have sort of a soft building as we paint. Now let me go ahead and clear out my canvas just to make this nice and apparent. You know, we have like the highest point right here in the middle, and then we slope off as we get away from the center of the stroke.
Okay.
And that's being defined by this alpha.
Gotcha.
I could change this to any other alphas. Like I've got this arrow here, and now if I was to paint, well, you can see it's just changing the shape of the brush.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it's also controlling the depth of the brush as well. White areas will give you the highest amount of depth, while black areas, which we can't even technically see because they disappear, would give us the lowest level of depth. For example, like here, you'll notice we have these little white globs, and if I just click, boom, those white globs come out a little bit higher than anything else.
Very cool.
A lot of different alphas to play with. You can bring in your own alphas. Like I could click import, and if I pop up a level, I've already got one. This is an actual Photoshop PSD file of the 3D Buzz logo. You can bring this in and paint with it.
So you can work with PSDs. Cool.
Yeah, and just kind of squiggle, and I get a little 3D Buzz logo. Down from here, now that you've established what tool you're using, you've established the shape of your brush, now you need to control what type of stroke you want to make. Now, by default, this is set to dots. And dots is going to give you a whole bunch of little tiny stamps of that. Now, you might have noticed earlier, back when we were still using this original alpha, that if I undo back a little bit, you don't really see the dots here.
Right.
It looks like a consistent stroke, and that's because these dots are being placed super fast.
Okay.
One right after the other. Now, if for some reason when you're using ZBrush, it's actually a little more apparent if you make your draw size very small and you move really quick, you can start to get those separated out from one another.
Okay.
If you want, you can switch over to a freehand stroke, which it's still, down at its core, it's still going to be made of dots, but it's going to be a lot more dots.
Okay.
The idea is that if you notice your stroke starting to break up, you can switch over to this. But you have other strokes as well. You have like a line stroke where you can just click and drag out a line. And it's starting to get a little bit difficult to see what's going on. So let me go ahead and clear out my canvas. And we'll go ahead and bring up the focal size a little bit. I'll also kick up my Z intensity, make this real loud. So there's a line. Now you'll notice it looks broken up while you're dragging. As soon as you let go, pop.
Cool. Okay.
So you can, create straight lines if you're not so steady-handed. Several different ways you can create strokes. One of my favorites, though, you have the drag rectangle. And what this is going to do is drag out kind of a picture of your alpha, so to speak. It's just going to use your alpha like a single image.
Okay.
So if I was to come back in here and grab like the 3D Buzz logo again, boom, we can just drag that out like
nice.
so. So boom, boom, and you just start stacking those up.
Okay.
So we've talked about you select your tool, you select the shape of your brush, the type of stroke you're going to make. But we're not done yet.
There's more.
But wait, there's more. Let's go ahead and go back to a freehand stroke, and let's go back to a more functional alpha. We can also control what type of material that we want to use. Now, by default, this is going to be set to fast shader, which you'll notice is kind of like this white, soft material. And you'll see that as we paint. We've got just a little bit of shading going on. And materials are how you control your shading. You have a lot of materials to choose from.
Okay.
Some are pretty fancy. Some, like the default fast shader, are fairly basic. For example, if we come over to the spherical blend,
whoa,
we get this sort of alligator skin look.
So now if you put 3D Buzz on there, it will have that material on it.
Yes. So let's go back over here. Let's select 3D Buzz. Let's grab drag rectangle and
excellent.
There you go. Now, a quick thing about that, if I create a stroke in that sense, let's say I want to position this stroke, you'll notice that as soon as I create it, two things appear up here.
Okay.
At the very top of our user interface, we suddenly have the ability to move this stroke and to scale this stroke, aside from draw, which is what we just got done doing. So now if I click on move, we get a little manipulator. Kind of fancy, huh? So I can move this around.
Very nice.
Get it positioned. I can scale.
Very nice.
And get things put exactly where I want them. What I wanted to kind of bring up with this, though, is you'll notice that our object appears to kind of swim through our material.
Procedural material.
That's right. The material is created procedurally.
Right.
And because of that, it's not necessarily locked down to the skin of your object, so to speak.
That's right.
Which is not a big deal, just something I wanted you to be aware of. So let's go back to draw. We'll undo this, and we'll just kind of move on from here.
Go ahead and set your alpha back to...
to something we can actually draw with. We'll set our stroke back.
Okay, cool.
And there's a lot of different materials you can play with. You got like a wood grain that looks kind of cool, and all sorts of things you can have fun with. What I like doing, like here's a fun one, just really quick. Like we could maybe grab a torus, and drag that out, and once we've got it positioned, we can grab our eraser, and see that was a 3D object, but notice that it erases. Because all it is now is pixels.
Exactly.
So there we go. I just want to chop out like the top of it. And then we could, cut some notches into it.
Very 3D feel.
Yeah, and it's not. It's 2.5D.
Gotcha.
So let's go ahead and just get rid of all that.
Okay.
That's just kind of fun.
Cool.
All right, so let's go back to what we were doing. We've talked about tools. We talked about alphas, strokes, materials, and then finally you have textures. Now, texture is not going to be viable with everything, especially if you have a wood grain, because, well, the texture would kind of get in the way. What is a texture? It's an image that goes kind of on the surface of your object.
Okay.
Now, I've just set myself back over to the fast shader, which is the default shader that comes in. If we want, we can apply a texture. By default, this is set to off. Notice, texture off. And we have a big, long list of textures to choose from. Also, we can bring these in if we want to. We can import them in. But let's grab, I don't know. Let's see. We have this guy, texture 04. And as I paint, I'm getting a whole bunch of little stamps of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I want to get something that looks a little fancier, we can go to drag rectangle. And there we go. So we have a copy of that starting to come in. But you'll notice it looks very faint.
Right.
Like we can barely see it. This is where Rgb intensity comes into play. I told you I'd get back to that later. This is kind of like the opacity of your brush as far as color is concerned. So as I crank this up and draw again, we have a much more vivid representation of our texture. So if we pull this really far down, we get almost nothing.
Yeah.
So just a quick look at that. Now, that's just about everything that goes into a brush stroke. Most of the time, you probably won't want to be painting with a texture.
Gotcha.
It's possible. I mean, here and there. And there are some applications where you're going to love doing it. But for now, we're going to assume that you're not doing it. Let's go ahead and clear out our document one more time. We'll go back to Layer and click Clear. And we can just choose a color.
Okay.
So we have our tool. Let's go back to a Freehand Stroke. And we've got our basic material. Now, we have a very cool kind of color picker here where you start off on the outer edge and you pick the actual hue that you want. So let's say I want like a shade of blue. We click on blue, and then we choose the saturation of it here inside the center area.
Very interesting.
So it can take a little bit of getting used to.
That's neat.
Very much like Photoshop, you got a foreground and a background color.
Okay.
And so right now I've set my foreground color to blue, so you'll notice now as I paint, I get that shade of blue. I can swap these colors back and forth. Okay. So now it's black. So now I'm painting with black. Very cool, because it just gives you the ability to hold a kind of a color in your cue, so to speak.
Gotcha.
If you don't like choosing colors this way, you can click on the system palette, and there's your standard old-fashioned. I mean, that's like even right out of Unreal Ed.
Yeah.
That's the old way of grabbing colors. But if you're more comfortable doing that, please, of course, feel free. So with that,
actually, I'm going to say that's going to be an excellent point to stop this video, because we've had a basic introduction to ZBrush. We've walked around the user interface, and we've just dealt with some simple paint up to this point. Of course, you've laid down a tool or two just to demonstrate that.
I'm going to throw one more thing out while you're talking.
Go ahead.
Really, really fast. You do have a paintbrush. You don't necessarily have to use depth. So I could, with the paintbrush tool, I can turn Z intensity down to 0. I just want to make sure I showed this in this video. Now look at this. I'm not changing depth. I'm just changing color.
So you can actually paint on what appears to be a 3D object, even though it's not.
That's all I want to do. Sorry.
No, that's cool. That's very cool.
Right, go ahead.
So what I want to do is we'll go ahead and bring this video to a close. And what's going to happen is in each of the videos now that come later, what we're going to do is just start adding to our knowledge base by simply doing small tasks. And at that point, we will introduce them to particular tools and palettes as we need them.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, if you don't mind, in the very next video, I might have you demonstrate some sculpting, maybe make a head or something.
Sounds fun.
Awesome. Okay, so that is going to wrap up this first episode. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks.